and I welcome the opportunity to take part. And thank you to Deputy Function for tabling the motion and also the additions put by Solidarity People Before Profit. I recognise the work you've done, Minister, to get us to this point, but I'm afraid I could go back on the history. I'm not going to in the limited time. So what I'm going to do is actually look at a number of matters. So we have the contribution or the submission from the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission, and then with a number of observations and recommendations. And they refer to the Commission of Investigation, page 22, and it says, by the Commission of Investigation's own admissions, it did not take a human rights-based approach. This has resulted in findings and recommendations that do not reflect Ireland's human rights or equality obligations, and in turn is not an adequate mechanism for identifying the full universe of survivors. I know that you've gone a little bit beyond the mother-baby recommendations, and I acknowledge that, but not enough. And then they point out, in the past, Ireland has been criticised for its narrow interpretation of the category of persons who should qualify and so on. And then they point out that all participants emphasised how the final report failed to recognise the gravity and magnitude of the human rights violations that occurred in mother and baby homes and the related institutions. And they reported a perceived lack of recognition. I'd go much stronger than that, but a perceived lack of recognition of the trauma of being separated from mother or child and the family destruction therein and so on. Now, you come forward then with a scheme, and notwithstanding your best efforts, you are now perpetuating the discrimination all over again and adding to the trauma, whether you like it or not. So let's look at people other than myself and my colleagues here who have said this. What the open letter that you've got from the therapists, a bold statement from them, and they don't often do it, and I want to welcome the fact that they've done it. I think there are 30 plus names and they've spoken out. First, childhood trauma, which includes separation from primary caregiver and exposure to multiple caregivers in an institutional setting, has the greatest impact early in childhood. Time prevents me from reading it, but I do ask all of the ministers and the government to read it. Secondly, there is no quantum of time that allows us to think about the impact of childhood trauma. Thus, having an arbitrary period of 6 months exposure is simply that, arbitrary. Simply that. What is known from research in the area of childhood trauma is that it is the combination of adversity and quality of relationships which confer risk. And they go on to refer to research, and having had the privilege of working in a previous life in psychology, I can refer you to Bowlby, who we knew off as students even when we weren't paying much attention to our studies, but we still knew the importance of the bond. And that letter is outlining all of that to you. The human rights submission tells you to withdraw, asks you to withdraw the 6 months distinction. Don't have it. And yet you're persisting with that. And so I look for some idea as to where that has come from. Where has that come from? What is the justification for this? And I'm afraid, like Deputy Barry, I can't think of any other reason other than a monetary one. And so we go to this report of the Interdepartmental Group. And again, they have done some good work. But I must say it's done within a financial framework without any understanding of the trauma that has been caused by by many parts of the experience, but particularly by the mother and baby separation. An utter failure to see that, and again a perpetuation of the abuse. And again, I want to say, I want to sort of apologise if sometimes I'm too passionate about it, but I know this inside out from both a professional and a personal experience. The personal has nothing to do with my role in the Dáil, but the professional side has, and it is our duty to highlight on every occasion where this government and other governments have perpetuated the injustice and the misuse of language. For instance, I noticed that this report, the Interdepartmental report, talks about kindness and the importance of kindness. Well, certainly I would think kindness is a quality that should be inherent in a just system based on principles. They talk about the principle of kindness. Kindness is not a principle, it is a quality that should be there in any interaction with the state. But what is important are the principles of justice, proportionality, fairness and equality and so on. That's not recognised in this interdepartmental report and what you're going to persist with. Now on page 35 we get some idea of why the 6 months is there. And very, very clearly and quite adamantly they tell us As outlined earlier in the chapter, the group is strongly of the view that the 6-month residency criteria is particularly important when considering children. Now, Minister, I don't know if you've read this. As it does not want, so the Interdepartmental Committee does not want to create a circumstance whereby being born in a mother and baby home or a county home is deemed a basis for the redress under the scheme. There you have it. They clearly don't want that. The mere fact that you were born in there is not going to give you any right or entitlement. And that brings home to me the utter failure to understand what we have all been guilty of in relation to mother and baby homes in Ireland, allowing it to happen. An apology was given by the Taoiseach. Other apologies were given in 1999 by Bertie Ahern, and we're utterly failing to act on those apologies in a meaningful fashion. Finally, as the time is running out, there has to be a serious consideration of interim payments. These are a vulnerable group. Over 1/3 are over 70, roughly. 1/3 are between 60 and 70, and 1/3 are nearing 60. That has to be the first and foremost matter. And finally, it's just the money. I cannot escape the conclusion that is simply done on money. The exclusion is not done on principles of justice or equality, but on saving money for the state, saving money for the religious institutions and the pharmaceutical companies.